So, it's November 1989. Somewhere off a quiet back road outside Daytona Beach, Florida, someone finds a body decomposing in the palmettos. The guy's been shot 3 times in the chest. His car's gone. Wallet's empty. The cops who rolled up to the scene figured it was probably a robbery that went bad. You know, maybe a drug deal. Wrong place, wrong time kind of thing. They had absolutely no clue this was just the beginning. Over the next 12 months, 6 more bodies turned up. Same thing every time. All men. All shot with the same gun. All dumped in these isolated spots along Florida's highways. And here's what really threw everyone. Serial killers who hunt random strangers, that's almost always men. This was something different. Her name was Aileen Carol Wuornos. And depending on who you ask, she was either America's first female serial killer, or she was a victim who'd finally had enough and fought back. Her story is honestly one of the most controversial and heartbreaking cases you'll ever hear about. It's about trauma, survival, violence, and this really blurry line between being a victim and being a perpetrator. This is about a woman whose entire life seemed designed to break her, and what happened when she finally did. Aileen Carol Pittman was born on February 29, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan. Leap year baby. She only had a real birthday once every 4 years. Looking back now, it almost feels like some kind of omen for the unusual, troubled life she was headed toward. But honestly, Aileen never had a shot at anything close to normal. Her father, Leo Pittman, was a diagnosed schizophrenic with a criminal record that included child molestation. He spent most of his life locked up, mental institutions, prisons, you name it. Aileen's parents split up before she was even born, so she never once met her dad. When Aileen was only 4 years old, her mom, Diane, just decided she was done being a mother. She abandoned both Aileen and her older brother Keith, just left them. So the kids ended up living with their maternal grandparents, Lori and Britta Wuornos. You'd think maybe this could have been their rescue, right? Like a fresh start with family who'd actually take care of them? Yeah, no, not even close. By all accounts, the Wuornos house was pretty awful. Aileen later talked about enduring physical and sexual abuse throughout her childhood, and she said it was her grandfather doing it. Whether every detail was exactly true or not, what nobody can deny is this. This little girl grew up feeling completely abandoned, unwanted, and totally alone. By the time Aileen was just 11, a heartbreakingly young age, she had already been exposed to situations no child should ever endure. In her neighborhood, she began engaging in inappropriate relationships with local boys in exchange for small favors, things like food, cigarettes, or other essentials, simply trying to get by. She was just 11, a time when she should have been focused on school and childhood, yet she was already being shaped by harsh realities. She was searching for affection, for stability, or maybe just for survival. Those early experiences set a devastating pattern. In a world that offered her nothing, she learned that her worth was tied to what she could give, not who she was. At 14, Aileen became pregnant under traumatic circumstances involving an older family acquaintance. This was 1971, and back then, being an unwed pregnant teenager wasn't just scandalous, it was considered deeply shameful, especially in a conservative household like the Wuornos family. She spent months in a facility for young mothers. She gave birth to a baby boy who was immediately placed for adoption. She never saw her son again. Just imagine that reality for a moment. You're 14 years old, you've experienced trauma, you're pregnant, you have this baby, and then they remove him from your life, expecting you to somehow move forward. Right after that, Aileen left school permanently. So now she's 15 with no education, no family support, literally 0 prospects. Then her grandmother passed away, and her grandfather, the person who should have been her protector, he expelled her from the home. Just like that, Aileen was without shelter, She started sleeping wherever she could find space: abandoned vehicles, the woods, whatever refuge she could manage, and she supported herself through unconventional means to earn money. She was still a teenager, living without a home, doing whatever it took for survival. In 1976, her brother Keith died of throat cancer. He was only 21 years old, and he was basically the only person she'd ever been close to. Aileen ended up inheriting $10,000 from his life insurance. $10,000. That could have changed everything, you know? A lifeline, a chance to rebuild, get an apartment, maybe return to education. Instead, she spent it all within weeks. Legal penalties, a vehicle she destroyed almost immediately. Just gone. That same year, Aileen traveled south to Florida. It was warm year-round, manageable for outdoor living, and the highways were full of travelers with money. Florida became both her residence and, eventually, her territory. For the next 10 years or so, Aileen Wuornos basically became a ghost drifting along Florida's highways. She worked the truck stops, the sketchy dive bars, the highway rest areas. She'd hitchhike, flag down cars, whatever it took to find customers. Her arrest record during this time is pretty extensive. Armed robbery, stealing cars, forged checks, disorderly conduct, drunk and disorderly, all of it. From May 1982 to June 1983, she did a stretch in prison for armed robbery of a convenience store. The cops who arrested her over the years, and she used different fake names, they all said basically the same thing about her. There was something off. She was hostile, confrontational, always seemed like she was looking for a fight. And get this, she was always armed. Always. Carried a loaded pistol everywhere she went, meeting complete strangers in parking lots and back seats with a gun in her bag. To the people who crossed paths with her during these years, Aileen seemed like someone who was barely hanging on, running on rage and cheap beer, stuck in this cycle she couldn't escape. But then, in 1986, something shifted. Aileen met this woman named Tyria Moore at a gay bar in Daytona Beach. Tyria, Aileen called her Ty, was from Ohio, and apparently they just clicked right away. They became lovers, partners, and they traveled together up and down the Florida coast. For maybe the first time in her entire life, Aileen felt like somebody actually gave a damn about her. Her and Ty, they moved around constantly, staying in cheap motels, and Aileen kept working as a prostitute to pay for both of them. It wasn't much of a life, but it was something. It was someone. On November 30th, 1989, Aileen accepted a ride from this guy named Richard Mallory. He was 51, owned an electronics repair shop. Probably seemed like just another customer. 2 weeks later, they found Mallory's body in the woods near Daytona, shot 3 times in the chest with a .22. His car turned up abandoned a few days after that. That was the first one. But Aileen wasn't done. Over the next year, 6 more men met the exact same fate. David Spears, a construction worker, found in June 1990. Charles Carskadden, 40 years old, same month. Troy Burris, this sausage salesman, killed in July. Then Charles Humphreys, who was actually a former police chief, which is pretty ironic when you think about it, found in September. And Walter Geno Antonio, a trucker who also worked as a reserve police officer, discovered in November 1990. Her method stayed pretty consistent through all of them. She'd proposition these guys for sex, drive them out to some isolated spot off the highway, and then she'd rob them. Take their cash, credit cards, whatever valuables they had, and then she'd shoot them. Multiple times usually. She'd take their cars, strip the bodies, and just leave them in the woods. When the cops finally caught her, though, Aileen told a completely different version of events. She swore up and down that every single one of these men had either raped her or tried to. Said it was self-defense, that she was just a woman trying to protect herself from violent men who'd attacked her. And that claim, it divided people. Still does. Was she lying to try to dodge the death penalty? Or was she telling the truth about at least some of them? We'll honestly probably never know for sure. By late 1990, law enforcement had finally connected all the dots. Same gun caliber, same pattern, same kind of victims. Middle-aged guys traveling alone on Florida's highways. There were witnesses who'd seen a blonde woman near some of the victims' abandoned cars. Police started putting out composite sketches. Then, in January 1991, they caught their break. Investigators tracked down Tyria Moore. And this is where it gets complicated. Under pressure from the detectives, Tyria agreed to help them out. She called Aileen while the police listened in and recorded everything. During those phone calls, Aileen basically confessed to the whole thing. She was trying to protect Ty, trying to keep her girlfriend out of trouble. On January 9, 1991, they arrested Aileen at this biker bar called The Last Resort in Port Orange, Florida. Within a few days, she gave detectives a full confession, admitted to killing 7 men but kept insisting that each one had assaulted her or threatened her first. Aileen's trial turned into this massive media circus. Female serial killers are so incredibly rare that this case basically challenged everything people thought they understood about violent crime. The prosecution painted her as this cold-blooded killer who murdered for money and stole cars like she was going shopping. The defense tried arguing self-defense and pointed to her horrible childhood, all the abuse she'd suffered her whole life. The jury wasn't buying the self-defense argument. Aileen Carol Wuornos was convicted and sentenced to death for 6 of the 7 murders. She ended up spending more than 10 years on Florida's death row. During those years locked up, Aileen gave tons of interviews. Sometimes she seemed genuinely sorry for what she'd done. Other times she was angry and defiant, claiming the whole system had railroaded her. This documentary filmmaker, Nick Broomfield, made 2 films about her, and you can see her behavior getting more and more erratic. He raised some pretty serious questions about whether she'd actually gotten a fair trial. On October 9, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. She was 46 years old. Her final words were honestly pretty strange and rambling. Something about sailing with the rock and coming back like Independence Day. Even at the very end, Aileen Wuornos was hard to understand. Aileen Wuornos is still one of the most controversial and argued about figures in criminal history. Her story got turned into that 2003 movie Monster, and Charlize Theron actually won an Oscar for playing her. But beyond all the Hollywood stuff, Aileen's case keeps sparking these really intense debates. Was she a cold-blooded serial killer who used her gender and her past trauma as a weapon? Or was she this deeply damaged woman who'd been failed by literally every system that was supposed to protect her, and she just finally snapped after a lifetime of abuse? The truth, like most things in life, probably lives somewhere in that messy, uncomfortable middle ground. What's absolutely certain is that Aileen Carol Wuornos was the product of serious trauma and complete systemic failure. Her case forces us to ask these uncomfortable questions about violence, justice, gender, mental health, and what happens when society completely abandons the people who need help the most. She called herself a victim right up until the end. The courts called her a monster. And history? History's still trying to figure out which label really fits.